At my family reunion, they laughed at my husband when I introduced him. Mom said, "This is exactly what you deserved, a poor wretched man." Dad laughed at him. "He doesn't have a common car." They were shocked when my husband's private jet landed in front of the house to pick us. Dear viewers, before I continue this story, please kindly subscribe to this channel, like and share our videos to your loved ones. Your support means the world to us. Now to my story. My name is Olivia Vance, and I am 32 years old. Growing up, the Vance name carried a certain weight in our town. Not that we were old money or landed gentry, but my parents, Patricia and Richard, had worked tirelessly to carve out a comfortable upper-middle-class existence. Our home, a sprawling Tudor with meticulously manicured gardens, was a testament to their ambition and a constant reminder of the life they expected me to lead. From the time I was a little girl, the whispers about my future husband were constant. Olivia will marry a doctor, a lawyer, someone who truly understands the value of a good name and a healthy bank account. They envisioned a grand wedding, a power couple, a continuation of the Vance legacy, perhaps even an elevation. My mother especially had a penchant for discreet inquiries into potential suitors' family backgrounds and financial portfolios, always under the guise of casual conversation. It was never about love, not really. It was about status, security, and a certain societal approval that felt as ingrained as the air we breathed. So, when I told them I was bringing Arthur Hayes home to meet them, there was an air of anticipation, almost a preemptive celebration. They'd grilled me for weeks about him, and I'd kept the details vague, focusing on his kindness, his intelligence, his quiet strength. I omitted the part about his wardrobe consisting primarily of well-worn, comfortable clothes, or the fact that he didn't own a car, preferring to walk or take public transport. I certainly didn't mention his incredibly modest apartment, which, while clean and tidy, was a stark contrast to the grand houses my parents associated with anyone worthy of their daughter. Arthur, bless his heart, was the antithesis of everything my parents had ever wanted from me on paper. He was kind, profoundly so, with a quiet demeanor that could easily be mistaken for shyness. He listened more than he spoke, and when he did, his words were thoughtful and insightful. He dressed simply, unconcerned with labels or fleeting trends, and he genuinely seemed content with very little. He was, in essence, everything they weren't looking for, yet everything I had come to adore. The day arrived, a crisp Saturday afternoon. I remember the nervous flutter in my stomach as Arthur pulled up to the curb, not in a sleek luxury car as my parents undoubtedly expected, but in a rather unassuming rideshare, a perfectly functional, if unremarkable, saloon car. He stepped out, a soft smile on his face, a small bouquet of wildflowers in his hand, a gesture of thoughtfulness, not extravagance. My mother, Patricia, met us at the door. Her smile cordial but her eyes already assessing. My father, Richard, stood behind her, a knowing smirk playing on his lips. The introductions were polite enough, but the tension in the air was palpable, thick enough to cut with a knife. Arthur, ever gracious, offered the flowers to my mother, who accepted them with a tight-lipped smile, her gaze already sweeping over his plain trousers and simple, unbranded shirt. We moved into the living room, a space designed for impressing guests, filled with antique furniture and valuable art. The conversation felt stilted, unnatural. My parents, usually so effusive, asked a few perfunctory questions about Arthur's background and work, but their questions felt more like interrogations than genuine interest. They wanted to know about his prospects, his future plans, and the subtext was always, how much money does he make? Arthur, for his part, answered truthfully, without embellishment or apology. He spoke of his passion for his work, a field they clearly didn't understand, and his commitment to living a life of purpose. He didn't try to impress them. He simply was himself, and that, it turned out, was his biggest offense in their eyes. Then came the comments. We were discussing our plans for dinner, and Arthur mentioned that he'd walked over to a charming little bistro earlier in the week, enjoying the fresh air. My mother's eyes narrowed slightly. Walked? She questioned, her voice dripping with incredulity, as if the very idea was foreign. My father, ever the more direct of the two, chuckled, a dry, dismissive sound that grated on my nerves. "He doesn't even have a common car," he scoffed, not even bothering to lower his voice as if Arthur wasn't sitting right there. It was a statement, not a question designed to belittle. My mother, seeing her opening, chimed in, her voice cold, laced with a triumphant bitterness. "Olivia," she began, her gaze fixed on me, ignoring Arthur completely. "This is exactly what you deserved. A poor, wretched man who can't even afford proper transportation." The words hung in the air, sharp and brutal, each one a deliberate stab. A hot wave of embarrassment washed over me, quickly followed by a surge of anger so intense it made my hands clench into fists. To speak to me, to us, with such disdain in our own home, was an unforgivable act. My cheeks flushed, but I forced myself to remain calm. I looked at Arthur, expecting to see hurt or anger in his eyes, but he simply offered me a small, reassuring smile, a silent acknowledgement of their unkindness, and a quiet strength that transcended their petty judgments. He remained composed, his dignity untouched by their cruelty. He simply listened, unperturbed, and in that moment, I loved him even more for his quiet resilience. If only they knew who they were really laughing at. The sting of my parents' words lingered long after Arthur and I had left their house, but it solidified something crucial within me. Their blatant disdain, their inability to see beyond superficial markers of success, only served to highlight the profound depth and genuine character that made Arthur so utterly captivating to me. Our story wasn't a whirlwind romance built on lavish dates or grand gestures. It was a slow, steady burn, a quiet discovery of shared values and an undeniable connection that transcended the material world my family held so dear. I met Arthur at a local community garden, a small, vibrant patch of green nestled between bustling city blocks, where I volunteered on weekends. I was attempting to coax some stubborn tomato plants into submission when he approached, offering a quiet tip on composting. He was wearing an old faded t-shirt and jeans, his hands stained with earth, and there was an immediate ease about him, a complete lack of pretension that was incredibly refreshing. We talked for hours that first day, about everything from sustainable living to classic literature, and I found myself drawn to his thoughtful insights and his gentle humor. What truly made me fall for him wasn't his looks, though I found his kind eyes and earnest smile incredibly attractive. It was his unwavering honesty, a refreshing candor that felt rare in a world often dominated by carefully curated facades. He spoke his mind, but always with respect, and he possessed a quiet integrity that resonated deeply with me. Our conversations were never about who had what or who knew whom. They were about ideas, passions, and the kind of life we wanted to build. He wasn't afraid to be vulnerable, to share his fears and his dreams, and he offered me a level of emotional support I hadn't realized I was so desperately craving. He saw past the polished exterior my upbringing had instilled, saw past the expectations and the societal pressures, and connected with the real me. He encouraged my passions, listened intently to my worries, and celebrated my small victories as if they were his own. He was my anchor, a calm presence in a world that often felt chaotic and demanding. He never judged, never pressured, and always made me feel seen and truly understood. Arthur was incredibly dedicated to his work, often spending late nights hunched over his laptop, his brow furrowed in concentration. He'd mentioned that he was working on something big, a project that required immense focus and long hours, but he never elaborated. There was no boasting, no flashy talk of potential riches or groundbreaking innovations. He simply explained it as something he believed in, something he felt could make a real difference. He didn't flaunt his progress or hint at the scale of his endeavors, even to me. He was modest to a fault, preferring to let his work speak for itself rather than drawing attention to himself. This humility was one of the many qualities I admired about him, a stark contrast to the performative displays of success I'd witnessed growing up. My family, however, couldn't shake their initial assessment. Their judgment of Arthur was ongoing, a persistent low-level hum of disapproval that occasionally flared into outright criticism. Every family gathering, every phone call, felt like a subtle interrogation or a pointed remark about our lifestyle choices. My mother would frequently ask, with a saccharine sweetness that barely masked her true feelings, "Are you sure Arthur is stable enough, dear? You know, for a family." My father would bring up news articles about successful entrepreneurs, seemingly casual mentions that were clearly designed to highlight Arthur's perceived lack of status. "Did you see that young fellow, Olivia? Started his own firm, made millions by 30. Now that's the kind of drive a man needs." They'd offer unsolicited advice, suggesting I encourage Arthur to get a proper job or think about his future. These were small, hurtful examples, insidious in their repetition, chipping away at my resolve. They'd subtly undermine Arthur's intelligence, his work ethic, his very character, all because he didn't fit their preconceived notions of what a successful man should look like or own. They couldn't grasp that true wealth wasn't just about financial assets. It was about character, integrity, and genuine happiness. Despite their relentless pressure, I stood by Arthur. My decision wasn't born out of defiance, but out of a deep-seated conviction that I had found something truly special, something worth protecting. I saw their comments for what they were, a reflection of their own values, not a true assessment of Arthur's worth. I learned to deflect, to change the subject, or simply to nod and smile, letting their words wash over me without penetrating. It was challenging, emotionally draining at times, but my love for Arthur and my belief in him never wavered. I knew with every fiber of my being that I had made the right choice, regardless of their approval. He was my partner, my confidant, and my greatest supporter. Their opinions, however loudly voiced, couldn't diminish the quiet joy and profound contentment he brought into my life. I had no idea how soon everything was about to change. The silence from my parents regarding Arthur's apparent lack of ambition was deafening after a while. They seemed to have resigned themselves to my unconventional choice, though I knew the judgment still simmered beneath the surface. What they, and indeed many others, failed to grasp was the true nature of Arthur's work, the quiet intensity with which he operated. He wasn't merely working on something big. He was building an empire. Arthur, it turned out, was a visionary. He owned a conglomerate of tech companies, discreetly acquired over the years, specializing in sustainable energy solutions and innovative AI development. He also held significant real estate portfolios, not the flashy commercial properties one might expect, but strategically chosen lands that were poised for monumental growth. His business was global, intricate, and meticulously managed, yet he never once boasted, never once sought external validation. He was, in essence, a quiet titan of industry. His reasons for not flaunting his wealth were deeply rooted in his character. He possessed an innate humility, a profound disinterest in the flashy, ostentatious lifestyle that often accompanies immense fortune. He genuinely didn't believe in showing off, finding it vulgar and unnecessary. For Arthur, true value lay in the work itself, in the impact he could make, not in the superficial trappings of wealth. He viewed money as a tool, a means to an end, rather than an end in itself. He believed in simplicity, in living a life unburdened by excess, and he found genuine satisfaction in the quiet pursuit of his passions. He valued his privacy above all else and deliberately kept a low profile, preferring to let his actions and his company's innovations speak for themselves, rather than engaging in the kind of self-promotion that so many others in his position embraced. He was the epitome of actions speak louder than words. One evening, about 6 months after the disastrous family reunion, Arthur came home, a rare playful glint in his eyes. He found me engrossed in a book, curled up on our modest sofa. He sat beside me, took my hand, and with a gentle squeeze said, "It's time to visit your family again, Olivia. And this time I want to pick you up in style." My heart did a little flutter. The words "in style" coming from Arthur, who usually considered a clean pair of jeans style, were intriguing. I looked at him, a myriad of emotions swirling within me. Nervousness, because I dreaded another encounter with my parents' thinly veiled condescension. Curiosity, because Arthur rarely spoke with such a deliberate hint of mystery and undeniable excitement, a thrill that something significant was finally about to unfold. I knew he was up to something, but even then, I couldn't have fully comprehended the scale of what was coming. He explained, with a quiet confidence that was both rare and captivating, that his latest venture had reached a crucial milestone, one that required a level of visibility he could no longer entirely avoid. He wanted me to experience it with him, to share in the culmination of his years of silent dedication. He looked at me, his eyes full of love and a touch of mischief, and said, "It's time they saw you with the man you truly deserve." My mind raced, trying to imagine what his idea of style could possibly be. A luxury car, a chauffeur, perhaps a really nice suit. My imagination, as it turned out, was woefully inadequate. I spent the next few days a bundle of nerves and anticipation. I picked out my outfit carefully, wanting to look elegant but approachable, a subtle defiance against my mother's usual criticisms. Arthur simply smiled at my fussing, telling me I looked beautiful no matter what. The day of the visit dawned bright and clear, almost too perfect. We had agreed to meet my parents for a late lunch, a slightly less formal affair than dinner, hoping to keep the tension to a minimum. I felt a nervous flutter in my stomach as we approached their house, a familiar knot of apprehension tightening in my chest. Arthur, however, was unusually calm, almost serene. He walked beside me, his hand resting lightly on the small of my back, his presence a comforting anchor. As we turned onto their tree-lined street, I prepared myself for the usual casual scrutiny, the veiled questions, the subtle put-downs. I braced myself for another round of their condescending remarks. But then, as we neared their driveway, Arthur stopped, a broad, knowing smile spreading across his face. He looked up, pointing. "Look," he said, his voice a low rumble of excitement. I followed his gaze, my eyes scanning the clear blue sky, expecting to see a bird or perhaps a cloud. But what I saw instead made my jaw drop. And then I heard it. The loud roar from above. The roar intensified, growing from a distant hum to an undeniable crescendo that vibrated through the very ground beneath our feet. My parents, who had just stepped onto their porch, drawn out by the unusual sound, exchanged confused glances. Their faces, initially etched with mild annoyance at the disruption, slowly morphed into expressions of bewildered curiosity as they scanned the sky. Their eyes, like mine, were drawn upwards, tracing the path of what was clearly no ordinary aircraft. The sound was unlike anything typically heard in our quiet, upscale neighborhood. It wasn't the distant drone of a commercial airliner, but a more direct, powerful surge of engines, growing louder with each passing second. Then it appeared. Not a small Cessna or a propeller plane, but a sleek, modern private jet, its polished silver body glinting in the afternoon sun. It was descending slowly, majestically, directly towards my parents' meticulously manicured front lawn. My mother, Patricia, gasped, her hand flying to her mouth, her eyes wide with disbelief. My father, Richard, who prided himself on his composure, stood frozen, his morning coffee cup halfway to his lips, a trickle of brown liquid running down the side. Their confusion was palpable, writ large across their faces, as they tried to reconcile the impossible sight before them with the familiar tranquility of their neighborhood. They looked at each other, then back at the descending marvel, as if questioning their own eyesight. The jet was magnificent. Its fuselage was a deep, sophisticated midnight blue, accented with a subtle, elegant silver stripe that ran along its length. Near the tail, a discreet yet distinctive logo was visible, a stylized, abstract rendering of a soaring bird, almost like a phoenix, intricate and bold. The landing gear slowly extended, lowering with a soft whirring sound, and the aircraft seemed to float downwards, its engines adjusting to a low, powerful hum as it prepared for touchdown. It was an engineering marvel, designed for speed and luxury, a symbol of immense wealth and power, settling itself gracefully on the pristine green expanse of my parents' front lawn. The manicured grass, usually only disturbed by the gardener's mower, was about to become a temporary runway for something truly extraordinary. The moment the wheels touched down, the jet's engines powered down, leaving an almost surreal silence in their wake, broken only by the gentle rustle of leaves in the breeze. The main cabin door hissed open, and a sleek, retractable staircase unfolded, extending down to the grass. My husband, Arthur, who had been watching the spectacle with a calm, almost serene smile, squeezed my hand. Then, with a casualness that completely belied the monumental event unfolding before us, he began to walk towards the jet. He didn't rush, didn't gloat. He simply walked, his posture relaxed, his stride even. He turned slightly, looked back at me, and with that same gentle smile that had first captivated me in the community garden, he called out, his voice clear and resonant in the sudden quiet. "Olivia, darling, are you coming?" My parents' expressions were priceless. Their faces were frozen in a tableau of stunned silence and wide-eyed astonishment. My mother's jaw had literally dropped open, her eyes darting between Arthur's retreating figure and the massive private jet now occupying their front lawn. My father, who had been holding his phone, seemingly about to call someone about the disruption, simply let it slip from his fingers. It clattered to the porch floor, unheeded. His coffee cup followed, tipping over and spilling its contents onto the pristine white porch railing, but he didn't even flinch. Their meticulously composed exteriors had completely shattered, revealing raw, unadulterated shock. The realization was slowly dawning on them, painfully, undeniably, that the poor, wretched man they had so casually dismissed was, in fact, the owner of the very object that had just landed on their lawn. Their laughter had been replaced by an absolute, profound silence. That day, my family learned there's more to a man than what he drives. The silence that followed the jet's landing was perhaps the loudest sound my parents had ever heard. It wasn't merely the absence of noise. It was the deafening crash of their preconceived notions, the shattering of their meticulously constructed worldview. The man they had laughed at, the one they had dismissed as wretched and poor, had literally landed a symbol of immense wealth and power on their doorstep. It was a visual mic drop, a profound statement that needed no words. From that day forward, the dynamic in my family irrevocably shifted. The apologies began almost immediately, though they were clumsy and often steeped in a thinly veiled self-interest. My mother, who had once sneered about Arthur's lack of a common car, was suddenly full of effusive compliments about his innovative spirit and quiet brilliance. She gushed about his visionary mind, and how she always knew he had something special about him. A blatant rewrite of history that was almost comical if it weren't so transparent. My father, whose dismissive chuckles had echoed in my mind for months, became uncharacteristically subdued. He no longer made snide remarks about Arthur's prospects. Instead, he would corner him at family gatherings, asking for business advice, or trying to understand the intricacies of his various ventures. His previous contempt replaced by a sudden, almost fawning respect. The shift was stark, almost jarring. Their previous condescension was replaced by a deference that felt almost too heavy, too deliberate. What changed was their perception of Arthur, and consequently, their treatment of both of us. The constant judgment ceased. The subtle put-downs vanished. They started inviting us to more events, introducing Arthur with an exaggerated pride that felt performative. Dinners at their house were no longer fraught with tension but filled with strained attempts at polite conversation, often revolving around Arthur's latest achievements. They began to treat me with a newfound respect as well, as if my choice, once deemed a grave error, had now become a stroke of genius simply because it had yielded financial prosperity. They saw the value in him only once it was quantifiable by a private jet. However, some things fundamentally did not change. While their outward behavior shifted dramatically, the underlying values that drove them remained the same. Their focus was still on appearances, on status, on what tangible assets one possessed. They still struggled to grasp the humility and genuine character that defined Arthur, seeing it perhaps as an eccentricity of the very wealthy rather than an inherent quality. Their newfound respect, while welcome on a superficial level, felt conditional, tied directly to Arthur's material success. It wasn't a genuine appreciation of him as a person, but rather an acknowledgement of his power and influence. It was a stark reminder that while the presentation had changed, The core of their motivations had not. My personal takeaway from that day was profound and enduring. It solidified my conviction that true love and genuine connection far outweigh superficial markers of wealth or status. Arthur's humility, his unwavering belief in himself regardless of external validation, taught me the immense power of patience and staying true to one's values. It showed me that quiet confidence often speaks louder than any boastful declaration. I learned that humility isn't weakness. It's a profound strength, a shield against the ephemeral judgments of others. It reinforced the idea that success in its truest form is not about what you acquire but about who you are and the impact you make. Today, Arthur and I are incredibly happy. Our marriage is built on mutual respect, deep love, and shared values. He continues to be a driving force in his industries, but his commitment to simplicity and giving back remains unwavering. We live a comfortable, fulfilling life, surrounded by genuine friends who appreciate us for who we are, not what we have. Our success, both personal and professional, feels all the more meaningful because it was built quietly, without fanfare, and despite the initial skepticism of those who judged by appearances. So the next time someone laughs at your choices, smile. Because sometimes the quietest people have the loudest victories.